Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And now, here are your hosts, Scott and Jesse from CompassKnox.com.
Hello and welcome back once again to Compass Points, the weekly podcast where we talk about Knoxville news, events, politics, government, and anything else that catches our attention. I am Jesse Mayshark, co-publisher, co-founder of Compass at CompassKnox.com, and I am joined, as always, by Scott Barker, co-founder and co-publisher of Compass at CompassKnox.com. Scott, how are you doing today?
Well, I'm doing a lot better than I was about a week and a half ago. And I think you could say the same thing.
Yes. So, interestingly, we had our last episode of Compass Points 2 weeks ago. Normally, of course, we do this every week. We announced at that point that we were going to take a week off. It was Labor Day weekend, not a lot going on. I was going to be out of town. It seemed like a good time to take a break. As it turned out, we would have had to have taken a break anyway, because not too long after taping that episode, both Scott and I started showing some symptoms and tested positive for COVID-19. Our very first go-round with this delightful virus after it's been in the wild for 2.5 years. And also, our producer, Seth Barber, here at Barbarian Studios, where we record this, tested positive at the same time, leading all of us, I think, to conclude that the last time the three of us gathered here, we're kind of returning to the scene of the crime here, one of us must have been positive, right?
Yeah, I think so. I think we can do our own version of contact tracing and figure out that that's probably what happened. One of us introduced COVID to the studio and spread to the rest of us. It's amazing to me that we lasted 2.5 years without getting it. That was just
you and I have covered election night parties with local politicos. We have been at public meetings full of people shouting and gesticulating and probably spraying things all over. And we had, up until now, managed to dodge this, both vaxxed and boosted, and I think doing everything we can to try to protect ourselves. But we should note that weekend that we all got sick coincided with the period when Tennessee was number one in the country for COVID spread. Since receded a little bit, but we were a hot spot, and I think we got hot.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and it just goes to show you. I mean, like you said, we were both of us been vaccinated. We had booster shots. We took precautions, and still got it. You know, that's kind of the story of COVID is that even when you take precautions, it is so easily transmissible that you can still get it.
And this setting, this was a very textbook situation, I think, because we're down here in Seth's delightful basement. But it's a small room.
Hey, you've been enjoying it on the hot days. I know that.
It's very temperate. But it's a small room, it's confined, and even though there's just 3 of us in here, so it's not like a big crowd situation, this is very much the kind of setting that experts have always said, because COVID is airborne, and it collects in small spaces, and it spreads very easily that way. So it's not at all surprising. Of course, we don't know which one of us was positive first. And also, it doesn't matter because it very much could have been any of us. We've all been out doing things. Seth and I both have kids in school. Schools have seen some spikes in COVID since the start of the school year. So there's any number of ways it could have come to us, and then we all shared it. I thought that, and we don't want to belabor this too much because thankfully we're all here. We all appear to be mostly recovered and healthy. But I thought it'd be interesting just to talk about our experience with it, since it's something we've been talking about for a long time, but not actually having that first person experience. I feel like it seems like we had somewhat similar experiences. I basically had fever for a couple of days between 99 and 101 or so. Basically felt crappy. I didn't feel great. And then, sort of several days of just feeling progressively a bit less crappy day by day.
Yeah, it was fatigue was the main thing. I've had the same experience. I had a fever for a couple of days and really wasn't bad. Wasn't a terribly high fever, but then the fatigue was the big thing that anytime you get up and go from one room to another, you're kind of like, oh, wow, I need to sit down.
Yeah.
And
see, mine was getting the energy to just get up and go to the other room. Like mine was a full lethargy. Like I just don't want to do. Like that was the number one symptom to me. It was like I need to go to the bathroom. Standing up and walking to the bathroom sounds like a lot of work.
Right.
I'd rather stay here.
I definitely had some times where it took me 20 minutes between thinking I needed to go to the bathroom and finally getting up to do it.
Yeah, but one thing that I don't know if you felt the same way, but with my experience was, thinking of the fact that we were vaccinated, we did get booster shots. It's obviously didn't hit us nearly as hard as it would have probably 2 years ago before the vaccines were available. And so I think it really shows that, or at least showed me, demonstrated to me that that's well worthwhile to get those get vaccinated and
and we can't. Of course, we can't prove this because we didn't have the benefit of having COVID without vaccine and then having it after being vaccinated. But that definitely, statistically and data-wise, that seems to be the case. Severe cases are much lower in vaccinated populations at all age groups.
Right. Here's a spot where I'll make an admission on air that I'm sure I'll get some hate for. I have not been vaccinated. I have not been boosted through this whole process.
Well, and you're a bit younger than us, I should say. Yeah. You're probably not quite in our demographic risk category.
I mean, I don't know your specific ages. I turned 41 in a month or so I'm not on the top end, I suppose. But again, I'm not disagreeing. I'm not saying anybody should or shouldn't get vaccinated. That's your own decision, kind of thing. But for me, I guess in the anecdotal evidence we have here, and we all, as we've discussed, seem to have a very similar experience of the process. And I guess I guess the question is, how old are you guys comparatively? And is the fact that we had a similar experience more to do with the age difference and the vaccine for you guys, me being younger, or is it the age difference, or is it lifestyles? There's
I think it's very hard to say. I mean, right. I'm 53. I'm going to be 53 here very shortly in a couple of weeks, and Scott's
59.
59, and
Holden.
And Holden, right? That's you're stopping right there.
My wife's 27. She's been 27 for 15 years almost.
Right. Well, and I think it's impossible to know. I think that if you look at the data, people who are vaccinated are much less likely to end up in the hospital, certainly much less likely to end up dead. But there are a lot of different factors. We know that, your risk goes up not quite exponentially, but tremendously with age. And
I think my stance on vaccine would change if I was 15, 20 years older than I am now. And with all the other conversation and all the things that people have been talking about, I think that was the important thing to me in the discussion, is that there's a lot of specific differences in your comfort with it versus my comfort with it was different because of the factors that we personally have. And I think that was an important thing that kind of got real buried there for a little while when it was at the height of the fear and the vaccine first coming
And I
out.
think it's a sort of point that a lot of people have moved to now, which is that we do have sufficient, hopefully sufficient, safety measures, protective measures people can take according to their own risk categories. My parents, for example, of course, are vaxxed and boosted, but they're also just like not going anywhere because they're both 75 and up, and they are really limiting all their interactions because it's not worth it. You know, everything that you do takes on sort of this greater significance.
And I'll say this too, is I got a call on Wednesday. My parents tested positive, and my dad said he got pretty, similar to what we were talking about, a couple days of feeling pretty bad or stuff like that. And every day, the last couple days I've talked to him, it's been getting better or whatever. And again, I don't know if like that started with me, but like they have been less active until recently about it. But again, vaccinated and boosted the whole nine with them. And so but they're, they completely shut down. Like they were locked down in the house full on. And so, again, it's such a complicated individual issue.
And something I think we're just going to keep navigating. Fortunately, all three of us for now probably have a little, again, going by the data, we've got a little window of not invulnerability, but the likelihood of any of us getting sick again immediately is quite low, although that, like the vaccines, protection from prior infection seems to wane as you get out from it. Right. There is this new booster out now. I, for example, will probably wait. If I hadn't had COVID, I might be thinking about going and getting that new booster. Now that I'm coming out of an infection, I'm going to wait a few months because, I should have pretty good protection in the immediate future.
Well, that's CDC guidelines suggest that you, if you had an immediate infection like we have, to wait 2 or 3 months and then do it. So that's kind of my plan too.
One thing worth mentioning, there is a fairly significant body of data and evidence now starting to show up about the after effects of COVID. And of course, there's a lot of talk about long COVID, which is somewhat hazily defined, but people who have really ongoing symptoms that can be one way or another traced to their initial infection with COVID. That's one set of issues. There's another whole set of issues, which is that COVID infection appears to have physical impacts on people whether they know it or not. There are CAT scans and brain scans showing, a measurable reduction in gray matter, for example, among people who have been infected with COVID at all age levels. The Financial Times just did a massive data crunch of data from the British National Health System, and they found that incidences of heart attack, stroke, basically heart disease across the board, and a few other things have all gone up significantly, again, statistically significantly in the year since COVID hit, and are much higher. And that's happening in people who had prior COVID infections. Doesn't even appear to matter whether they had severe cases or not. The indicator is prior COVID infection. So the three of us and most of the people who we know at this point, probably most of the people in Knox County who have had COVID, all of those are things that could well be affecting us. We don't know. There's also nothing you can really do about that. It's just something to kind of know. I was joking, maybe morbidly, with a friend, maybe it was with you, Scott, that, well, if we all have a reduction in cognitive function, will we even notice?
That was me, yes. That's one, I guess, silver lining to that is that
relatively we'll all be a little bit.
Relatively we'll all be.
I think this is actually the plot line of Idiocracy. I think that's kind of what happened. The overall pop. Anyway, and by no means do I intend to make light of any post-COVID symptoms, which could affect us as they have affected other people. It's just one of those things that we all kind of have to be aware of and live with. I will say that having gone through it once, I'm not in a big hurry to do it again, mostly because I don't like being sick, man. I resent, the way I think of it now, I'm over 50. I don't have an infinite number of weeks left on the planet. And so every week that I spend laid up on the couch feeling crummy is a week I resent.
Yeah, it's definitely the older you get. Of course, you know, when you're young, when you're in your 20s and your 30s, you kind of think you're invincible, and you get to be our age and you kind of realize, I'm not so invincible. And you know, while our bout with COVID was relatively light, I think would be fair to say, that the next time it might not be.
Yeah, next time it might not be. And also, even just what we had isn't something I'd recommend to anybody.
No.
Be like, hey, have a couple of days of fever and then 5 days of lying on the couch not feeling like you can do anything. It was a great victory for me last week when I took the garbage out. And I got back in from taking the garbage out and laid down on the couch for 10 minutes. I was like, okay, that's all the physical activity I can handle today.
No, not to re-dive too deep back in, but did either one of you guys have any, other than like cold medicines or aspirins or anything like that as far as your process, or was it just laying low and staying at home?
I took a lot of Advil.
Yes.
Yeah,
I did as well.
Yeah, Tylenol. Which one was it? Is ibuprofen the one that we're supposed to be avoiding?
Actually, ibuprofen's okay. I read about all this.
Okay, yeah.
Because in the initial months of COVID, there were these notices that maybe ibuprofen might have some bad interactions with COVID or something. That basically turned out to be a statistical error. And so now they say Tylenol, acetaminophen, ibuprofen, whatever you normally take is fine. I did actually contact my doctor, as they say you should do, about Paxlovid and the antiviral treatments that are available, which they mostly recommend for people in various high-risk categories, which I didn't really feel like I was in a particularly high-risk category. But I called my doctor's office and talked to a nurse, and that's what she said. You know, she kind of looked at my stats and the symptoms I was having at that point and said, it's not indicated for you. And also, it has some side effects itself. I didn't really feel like putting myself on some high-dose antiviral medicine if it wasn't necessary. And so I did not do that. But again, that's an individual thing. I know people who have done Paxlovid and felt like it did have some effect in tamping down the symptoms.
Yeah. I thought about it too. I just never felt bad enough. I felt bad, but not bad enough.
Right.
And of course, next time it could be different, if there is a next
and you got to
time.
remember, though, the definition of seriously sick is whether or not you go to the hospital.
Yeah.
Like, that's the important thing. If you didn't feel sick enough
you
to go to the hospital.
You can be pretty darn sick and not go to the hospital.
Yeah.
I have a nurse friend who we've talked about it before, and he's like, if you didn't feel like you needed to go to the hospital, like if you didn't think you were going to die, you really aren't that sick. And it's like, I was feeling pretty bad about it, but that's how.
Well, and
that's
I do
the
think
definition.
that's another thing to keep in mind when we talk about mild cases, because we've kind of taken mild to mean this whole range of people who barely have any symptoms, which I know people have had that experience, all the way up to it just means you didn't have to go to the hospital. And so I would say, what we had were quote unquote mild cases. I think they were very consistent cases with other people I know who have had it. It seems like kind of a normal medium case of COVID. But when we say mild, like, it still disrupts your life. I had to cancel a long planned and much desired trip to New York, for example. This probably is going to change the way I think about some of those things. If I know I have a trip coming up, I might do the podcast remotely next time and say, guys, I'm going to call in. I just don't want to risk it because I don't want to have to cancel something. So I do think that those kinds, we're not entirely moved past worrying about people getting very sick and dying. That is, in fact, still happening.
Yes.
Mostly in the higher risk categories and or the unvaccinated populations. But even beyond that, there's just the issue of, like, how do you want to try to plan to live your life around this
Right,
thing?
because work, you guys have it a little differently because I have a day job, and there's been policy changes over the years when the vaccine came out and stuff like that, whether I could use sick time or whether I had enough sick time left of the year, and if there was any punishment for going over my PTO availability and stuff like that. Fortunately, I had a full week left, and we were off for the holiday, so I had an extra day kind of in the bag. But like for, you guys being a little bit anomalous in that example is that you guys can work from home and it kind of works that way. But, those out there in the workforce, like taking a week off of work without pay could be a big deal.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like, well, I'm stuck with the decision of, do I risk it and go to work and maybe put some people at risk? But I have rent coming up, and how to manage that situation as this thing continues to be, what is it, endemic, not a pandemic anymore, right? And so I think that's another factor that goes into the complications
I think
of this.
Technically, this is still a pandemic, and endemicity would be at a lower level of transmission than we're seeing right now. But we're at a different stage of it where there is kind of an assumption that, well, life's going to go on regardless. And I do think, 2 years ago when this hit, there was a lot of talk about, well, it's time for all these companies to get their act together and talk about having, more paid sick time and whatever. I don't know how much that's happened. And I think the result is that we are certainly seeing plenty of people going to work either not knowing they're COVID positive and spreading it, or knowing they're COVID positive and just saying, you know what, I got bills to pay, and sorry, So anyway, I'm glad that all of us are here on the mend. And what Seth just said about you and I continuing our work through all of this, I think brings us to the next topic for us to talk about. And we should say here, because we just kind of jumped in and started talking about COVID, on this week's podcast, we do not have an interview or a Q&A segment. We're still sort of in recovery mode, I guess you could say. We'll hopefully have both of those coming back next week. We do have, it's been 2 weeks, so we do have some things to talk about in the local government realm, for sure. But before we do that, I want to note that another thing that happened this past week is we celebrated our
4th anniversary.
4th anniversary of Compass.
Absolutely. I can't believe it's been 4 years.
We launched Compass in September 2018.
I know. And it's been two very interesting and fun years. I've been having a great time.
Well, we've now been through a complete cycle of county elections.
Yes.
One cycle of city elections with another one coming up next year.
We've actually had two. We've had 2 city elections.
That's right. Yeah. Well, because you have we've had multiple elections. We've had the pandemic, which I don't think either of us came into Compass planning to spend a lot of time writing about public health,
But yes, we wound up writing a lot about public health.
And then this past week, when we had COVID, we didn't miss a day. We published our daily weekday newsletter every single day. We had new content on the website every day. How did we do that?
Well, we did that. Seth mentioned earlier, one of the big benefits of doing what we do and the way we do it is we work from home.
Yeah.
So we were able to do that. We didn't have the first week that we were out. The week that we were really sick, we had no public meetings. We had no, everybody was kind of in get ready for holiday mode. Mm-hmm. So we had stories we were working on and things that happened, but we were able to work from home without compromising the coverage.
That's true. We timed it well, and ever since the pandemic started, you and I have always and we don't spend a lot of time together in actual physical proximity. Right. This podcast, which of course is where we got infected or spread it, but this podcast is kind of the one time a week that we reliably are actually in the same room together. But we have always said, well, the one thing we want to make sure of is we don't both get COVID at the same time. Well, that happened, but we carried on. I think our readers are understanding, and had one of us or the other been just sort of too sick to do anything for a few days, I think they probably would have understood. But I felt pretty good that we were able to kind of keep the lights on and the presses rolling. Basically.
Yeah, that was very gratifying to be able to do that. I was, like you said, the nightmare scenario was both of us having COVID at the same time and not being able to do that because, I think that our readers have come to depend on us, and and I would hate to have been in a situation where we wouldn't be able to do what we normally do for a couple of days. I think that would have been that would really bug me, and I'm glad we're able to come through.
We can't promise that will never happen.
Right, we can't.
Obviously, we are two guys in our 50s, and so
yes, things happen.
All sorts of things can and probably will happen. But we've had 4 years of publishing Compass every single weekday since 2018. Thanks to, of course, all of our subscribers, our growing number of subscribers. If you are not one, take a moment, go to CompassKnox.com and look at what you're missing, who make it possible for us. We're very grateful to them. We had talked about having some sort of subscriber happy hour to invite people out, and then, of course, we got sick, but maybe we can still reschedule that in the coming weeks.
Yeah, I'd like to have some way that we could get together, give subscribers the opportunity to come and chat with us and let us thank them and
tell us all the things that they wish we were doing that we're not.
Yeah, they can tell us everything we're doing wrong. That's what readers of news do.
Absolutely, and we welcome the feedback,
yes,
positive, negative, or otherwise. All right, well. So we've talked about COVID. We've talked about Compass. Enough about us. Let's talk about local government, local issues. We did have several actually interesting things happen these last couple of weeks. And why don't you start out by talking about the appointment of the fellows at the brand new University of Tennessee Civics Institute.
Yeah, this is the Institute for American Civics. This was really pushed by Governor Bill Lee and created by the legislature. So it was kind of thrust upon UT, as it were. It's going to be housed at the Baker Center for Public Policy. And one feature of this is there is one of the first, let's back up a second. The goal is to kind of foster civic awareness and civic understanding, civics education in a nonpartisan or bipartisan format. There is going to be an academic component. There's also an outreach component to it. But one of the features is they have this board of fellows that be created, and the board would be they would advise the institute and kind of help come up with vision and plans for the future. Also be the de facto search committee for its director, who's yet to be named. And one of the interesting things was they did try to make it it was intended to be bipartisan, but one of the concerns I think that some people had going into it would be that political makeup of this group. One of the reasons is Governor Lee kind of in his State of the State address last spring kind of tied this with the initiative to bring in charter schools in K through 12 and bring in Hillsdale College, which is kind of a controversial school.
Very right-wing Christian conservative.
Right, and he kind of tied those together in his speech and gave a lot of people the idea that they were going to bring in Hillsdale College affiliated schools or related schools, K through 12, and then the next extension would be when you go to college, you're going to have the Civics Institute. It's going to be pretty much the same.
Right. There was a suspicion among Democrats in the legislature and faculty at UT that this was the idea of the Civics Institute was to be kind of like a right-wing answer to what they perceived as an overly left-wing campus, kind of.
Well, and I think that the UT administration is the one that President Boyd and Chancellor Plowman and people at the Baker Center were the ones who kind of came up with these fellows. And I think that they did think you can look at it and a reasonable person would say they did a pretty good job of balancing things out. They had several categories of members. The top tier members were there had to be one person from each political party who'd been, an elected or appointed official in some way. They got two former governors. They got former Governor Breslin, former Governor Haslam to be on there.
A Democrat and a Republican.
Breslin, of course, a Democrat, and Haslam a Republican, and both I think there are well regarded as far as being reasonable and being. I don't want to necessarily say middle of the road, but definitely reasonable, even keel kind of people.
Certainly moderates within their own parties.
Within their own parties,
sure.
yes. And so two board members from the Baker Center are also on this board. But then now the where everybody was kind of thinking things could get squirrely. There were 9 members who had to come from academia, somewhere in academia, and they got some pretty good heavyweights. They went to Harvard and got Arthur Brooks, who's a conservative thinker, and Danielle Allen, who is a liberal thinker, and both come from Harvard. You don't get much much more higher academic credentials than that. We had another member from Princeton, a couple from Vanderbilt. Had some names that people would recognize. John Meacham, who is a Pulitzer Prize-winning author, historian, former Newsweek editor from Chattanooga originally, and so we share the same birth town. But anyway, he is on board. He's generally considered more of a liberal media person,
sort of a center left,
and then you've got Glenn Reynolds from the University of Tennessee, the Insta pundit, who is well known in conservative circles, and so for his commentary. So
occasionally provocative commentary.
Occasionally provocative, yes. He's probably the one on there who's the most provocative of anyone. But I think that if you look at it, from the kind of a centrist point of view, I think you could say they probably did a pretty good job.
Well, and that's, I think there has been some pushback against it. First of all, that it is overall a quite sort of politically centrist group. I mean, it doesn't span the spectrum in the sense that, there's not a Marxist and a fascist. But and also there is only one person of color, Danielle Allen.
That's true.
It's an almost entirely white board. So certainly from a diversity standpoint, you could raise issues with it. On the other hand, I think given the concerns that were out there that this was going to be a very ideological, right-wing driven group, that clearly is not what happened with it.
Absolutely. I think that that fears that it would be completely right-wing thing, gone. I don't think you can say that.
And nobody from Hillsdale College was invited.
No one from Hillsdale College was named. That was I don't know if that was actual. I don't think they ever actually considered it, but there were you could if you were on the left end of the spectrum, a fear. And since Governor Lee was the one who kind of made the connection, you could kind of see, well, that was a possibility. But no, I think once it got to UT and the Baker Center, and they started looking at possible people to name to this board, I think that that really they decided to move forward with integrity and and look at academic qualifications first and foremost.
It's serious people with serious track records.
Absolutely. You don't get more serious than Princeton and Harvard and Vanderbilt, and I think that the folks at UT would want me to put UT in that same group. But they really looked at their academic credentials and the seriousness of thought, and to make it a true academic endeavor.
So now they have to hire an executive director,
Yes.
which will probably also be subject to a fair amount of scrutiny in terms of who that person is and what their track record is. And they're going to have programming. They're going to maybe be offering actual degrees through it. UT is talking about...
Yes, they will be offering degrees.
Right.
They will be offering degrees through there. They haven't... They're still working on a lot of the details, but the actual degree granting will be a little bit down the line. They may, and it's going to be a little bit of an interdisciplinary thing. Some of the classes that would apply to a degree through the institute, they're already being taught on campus,
right?
And so technically, people can start fulfilling their requirements pretty soon, maybe as soon as the spring semester. Although no degree will be conferred until through the institute for some time.
All right. Well, certainly we will continue to watch that. It's an interesting new entity there, and lots of
No. I was just going to say, speaking, one of the things is these are people who got new appointments, new positions, and I was going to just throw this to you because you covered a place where there was an appointment. I guess an election, not necessarily an appointment, that was kind of surprising.
Mm-hmm. Yes, nice segue. So when we found out we were sick last week, or 2 weeks ago, one of the things we thought was, well, there's nothing major on the civic calendar that last week of August. We can cover things from home. One of the things that was on the calendar was, first of all, the swearing in of new county officials. Everybody who got elected in the August 4th county election was sworn in on September 1st, as is required by county charter. That's the term begins on September 1st. So County Mayor Glenn Jacobs was sworn in, Sheriff Tom Spangler, a whole host of people, including members of County Commission. And then immediately, or an hour or so after that swearing in ceremony, County Commission gathered for a special meeting, which again they do every year. It's their reorganization meeting. Mm-hmm. It's usually not very interesting, usually not very exciting. They elect a chair, they elect a vice chair, and then they make a bunch of committee assignments. It usually takes about an hour all told. And so I thought, I cover County Commission, and I was just going to sit home on the couch and watch it from there, which is what I did. But I thought I knew going in what was the only real question in these meetings usually is who's going to be the chair, who's going to be the vice chair. Those are not only symbolic positions. The chair, in fact, actually has to do a fair amount of work. They're the one who has to compile the monthly agenda. They kind of oversee the operations of the commission office. They schedule special workshops and meetings. And then they run the actual commission meetings. So it's not just it is actually a job that requires some work. And then vice chair is kind of like the person who backs up the chair on all of those things as needed. But also, and the reason that there's ever any real discussion about this is they're kind of like political, it's a way for people who are on commission to kind of signal maybe their political ambitions. If you've served as chair of commission, maybe it gives you a little more visibility. It gives you a little more, gives your resume a little bit of a boost. It shows that you've been respected by your colleagues. It's just kind of a feather in the cap. And so there can be a fair amount of jockeying about these positions. And going into this, so the previous chair was Richie Beeler, 8th District Commissioner. In March, when Richie, who had been a longtime county employee, had left the county to go be a full-time pastor, and then in March, he took a full-time job back with the county, working as chief of staff to County Clerk Sherry Witt, which is allowed. Yeah. County employees can serve on county commission. It's bit of an oddity. School board employees cannot serve on the school board. City of Knoxville employees cannot serve on city council, but in county government, you can work for the county and serve on county commission. But when Richie Beeler took that job back with the county, he sent everybody on commission a letter saying, I've taken this job, and also I don't intend to seek another year as chair. Kind of saying that by way of acknowledging that, it could look like a little bit of a conflict of interest to be working for the county and being on commission, much less being chair of commission. But in the weeks leading up to the organization meeting, there started to be a lot of talk, including from other members of commission, saying, hey, Richie Beeler's done a really good job. Everybody, I think, felt like he ran very smooth meetings all year. Things were well organized. He's a pretty low-key guy. People felt like his personality worked well with the position. And so there was a push saying, would you consider serving another year? And his response to that was, well, I had said I wouldn't seek the position, but, kind of, if it's thrust upon me, I will accept it. Okay. So I had reported that seemed like that's what everybody was saying. Richie Beeler is going to be the next chair. And then the thought was that Terry Hill would be vice chair. She had expressed interest in it. She's a former chair of the school board. Everybody seemed to be okay with that. Yeah, Terry will be a good vice chair. So going into that meeting, that's what I thought was going to happen. This shows the danger of political prognostication. That's what I think lots of people in county government thought was going to happen. I think that's what a lot of people in County Mayor Glenn Jacobs' office thought was going to happen. That is not what happened. So when that swearing in happened, the 3 new commissioners who got sworn in, Gina Oster, Rhonda Lee, and Kim Frazier, all Republicans, all women, as soon as they were sworn in, County Commission, for the very first time in its history, had and has a female majority. County Commission is now made up of 6 women and 5 men. This has never happened before. We talked about this a little bit the other week, that this is they're like the third, we already had female majorities on school board and on city council, and now County Commission as well. All of our local legislative bodies, majority women.
Right.
And we even talked about a little bit that it would be interesting to have a 6-woman majority on commission, but there was no particular reason to think they were all going to vote as some organized block. 2 of them are Democrats. There are only 2 Democrats on all of County Commission, 9 Republicans and 2 Democrats. Both of the Democrats are women, Daisha Lundy and Courtney Durrett. And then Gina Oster and Rhonda Lee are perceived as being pretty, they're on kind of the right wing of the local, they ran as pretty hard right conservatives for County Commission. Kim Frazier is not seen, she is a Republican, ran as a Republican, is not seen as being, I think, super partisan or ideological. Her focus has been much more on sort of land use issues and planning and those kinds of discussions. And then Terry Hill is a longtime Republican. Her family is Republican. Her husband's a former Republican state legislator. She's a very politically active, very solidly Republican West Knoxville family. And so, again, like I said, it didn't seem likely that, the women are going to be this voting bloc. Well, when the organization vote was held, Daisha Lundy nominated Courtney Durrett, the other Democrat, to be chair, which wasn't in and of itself surprising that one Democrat would nominate another Democrat to be chair. And then another commissioner, I believe it was Kyle Ward, nominated Richie Beeler for another term. But when the vote went around the table, all 6 women, including the 4 Republican women, voted for Courtney Durrett, the Democrat, to become the new chair of County Commission. Richie Beeler passed on the first round of voting, I think to kind of see where it was going. When he realized that the votes were there and that Courtney Durrett was going to be the new chair, he went ahead and changed his vote from a pass to vote for her. Sort of a graceful move from the outgoing, who suddenly discovered he was the outgoing chair. And so Courtney Durrett, one of only 2 Democrats on commission, was actually elected chair by a 7-4 vote, with 5 Republicans voting for her. And then Terry Hill was named vice chair, as everybody expected. So this raised immediately a lot of questions. I was sitting home, like I said, watching, and immediately started texting with people. I was getting texts. I was getting phone calls. Everybody, for those of us who pay attention to and care about these things, this was one of those events that, some of us kind of live for, where it's like, what just happened? You're trying to figure it out. And when I eventually talked to Courtney Durrett about this vote, I said, I had expected that Richie Beeler was going to get it, and I had even written that seemed likely. And I told Courtney that, this shows that I'm a better reporter than I am a pundit, because I was wrong in what I thought was going to happen. But when I found out I was wrong, I was sort of delighted, not in the sense that I thought it was some great thing that Courtney Durrett specifically was chair, but I like being surprised. I like when things that I don't, it's nice when our political processes, which sometimes can seem very sort of, written out ahead of time, because you can kind of see all the machinations behind the scenes. It's nice when things happen that you don't expect. It shows you that there's a reason that we actually have meetings. Yes. There's a reason that we have votes. But what appears to have happened here, on the surface, you would look at it and say, well, the women all kind of decided to work together and take over county commission. I think that's basically what happened. I don't think, it certainly wasn't a deliberate choice to make a Democrat the chair. I think it was more that they realized coming in that this was a new era on county commission. We do have a majority of women on it for the first time. And they had the votes. They didn't have to, I think what everybody expected was that Terry Hill would be vice chair for a year and then maybe run for chair the next year, and then there would be a woman chair. Because again, there had also not only never been a woman majority, there'd never been a woman chair of commission. I think they just decided they didn't need to wait a year.
Yeah, I think that, I think they did too. And one thing that I think it's important to note is that, and if they had talked before the meeting about it in private among themselves and decided that's what they were going to do, it's actually wasn't a violation of the Sunshine Law. I think that that's one of the things, especially since Black Wednesday from many moons ago, that people remember that still. Sirens go off when you talk about
right, because it was clearly coordinated ahead of time. Courtney Durrett had a little speech written out. It was like when somebody at the Oscars wins and gets up there and says, "Oh, I can't believe I won," and then they pull out a speech. It's like, "Oh, you expected this."
Yeah. It's not a violation of the Sunshine Law, because up until they were sworn in, they weren't.
Those three new members.
The three new members were not members of county commission, so they couldn't break the Sunshine Law because they weren't members. And so anyone, a single member that was already on the commission could talk to all three of them at one time if they wanted. Yeah. And
those three could all talk to each other as much as they wanted, and any one of them or all three of them together could talk individually to any of the sitting members of commission, which obviously made the coordination, and again, it was nobody even pretended it wasn't coordinated. Something like that doesn't happen by accident. And one obvious question that came up was, well, if there were the votes to make a woman chair instead of Richie Beeler, why not Terry Hill, who was running for vice chair, has experience as chair of the school board, clearly could be chair of county commission, and is a Republican, is a member of the majority party. And the answer to that question, which I asked Terry Hill, was she didn't want to do it this year. And that's how she said it. She said, I didn't want to do it this year. She has some travel plans coming up. Like I said, being the chair is actually a job that you have to devote some time to. She didn't feel like she could do it this year with what she has planned. But she said she is certainly not ruling out wanting to be chair in the future. And so I think that's maybe something we'll see coming down the pike. It did create a fair amount of behind-the-scenes angst among some Republicans. And in fact, the day after that vote, that Friday, there were anonymous text messages that went out to Republican voters in Terry Hill's district, Rhonda Lee's district, and Gina Oster's district, basically accusing them of kind of selling out to the Democrats and, encouraging people to contact them and demand to know why they had voted for a Democrat. And on the other side of the partisan ledger, Matt Shears, the chair of the Knox County Democratic Party, who I don't think had anything to do with any of this happening, because it had to do with, sort of politics between and among different Republican factions, and also, I think, again, just a general sense among the women on commission that, it's time for us to run this thing. But Matt Shears was very happy to basically declare victory. It was
yes.
like it was an open basket for him, essentially.
Absolutely, and yes, he was very pleased when I talked to him, and so I think one of the things is in Knox County for so long, Republicans have tended to have the upper hand. I think that is one of those things that, hey, we'll take a win anywhere, in any way we can get.
Well, and it fits with the narrative that the County Democratic Party has been pushing, which is that they're kind of surging.
Right.
They're on the comeback trail, kind
Right.
of. And when you have, and this got attention from what I'm told at the state level too, in the state Republican Party. Because Knox County is actually the single largest Republican majority county in the state, because the two bigger counties, Davidson and Shelby, are two Democratic majority counties. And so Knox County matters a lot to state Republicans, and they assume that they're going to not only win all the offices, but kind of hold all of those leadership positions. So I'm given to understand that there was definitely some unhappiness in the upper echelons of the state Republican Party that suddenly in Knox County, which they consider a safe Republican county, the chair of county commission is going to be a Democrat. Now, as Terry Hill said when I talked to her, it doesn't really matter. The chair doesn't have any more say than anybody else on commission. They only have one vote. And any commissioner can add any item to the agenda. So it's not as if the chair compiles the agenda, but they don't control what goes on there. So in that sense, it doesn't, the Republicans still have a 9-vote supermajority on county commission. I don't think we're going to see any, and I do think it's true that the 6 women are not going to vote together on every single issue. I'm sure there will be things they vote together on, but I don't think we're going to see that as a consistent block. It's going to be more about a case-by-case basis. Still, pretty interesting, and something that I found as a reporter diverting as I was sitting on the couch recovering from COVID. So, moving on from kind of a county kerfuffle to a city kerfuffle. City Council this past week, you recovered from COVID just in time to get to go to City Council, and actually to a press conference before the City Council meeting as well, having to do with trees. So what happened in the Great Tree Fight?
Oh, well, yeah, that was actually the first day that I had really gotten out and about, and I was treated to some kind of a resolution of a fight. We talked about it before. This was the Cradle of Country Music Park in downtown Knoxville, at the corner of Gay and Summit Hill, where the city is going to be installing a $500,000 sculpture, and that's been kind of controversial, especially of late, because to put it in the park, the city was going to have to remove 5 mature trees there. The two Chinese maples and 3 willow oaks that were there, and the local Sierra Club has been kind of rounding up opposition to that, because they didn't think that they wanted to save those trees. And,
right, they weren't necessarily opposed to the art. They didn't think the art was worth losing trees over.
They're not anti-art; they're pro-tree, and so they had a petition and over 1,000 signatures, according to them. 2 weeks ago, a lot of them showed up at a meeting. They'd gotten Councilwoman Seema Singh to propose a 6-month delay on anything to do with the project, which would have set back the installation quite a bit, because the installation is going to happen sometime in the next few months.
And that had already been delayed a year or more by COVID.
Yeah, it was already delayed by COVID. I mean, this project was actually approved in 2018. It's one of the first things that I covered for the city was the approval of this, this sculpture. But the installation is the last part of it. They're getting ready to put out get that contract settled, and this would have delayed it at least 6 months. And they'd gotten a lot of momentum. There was a lot of there's a lot of chatter online and in social media, and like I said, a bunch of them had been to the city council meeting 2 weeks before, and they decided to defer consideration of this. So on Tuesday they were they were gearing up for this meeting anyway, and the Kincannon administration kind of stole their thunder a little bit, and early in the day they had it was kind of a press conference. It's basically they were just came and talked. They didn't have any big, it wasn't a podium and all that stuff, but they resolved this by taking the sculpture and its base in the planning and moving it a couple of feet to the south, which basically will enable them to save 4 of the 5 trees. Mm-hmm. So only 1 tree will need to be removed now. Then, of course, they had the city council meeting, and people still showed up. They still talked about it, but it was obvious that this compromise that they'd worked through was going to be sufficient to move it forward.
And Councilwoman Singh actually withdrew her.
She actually ended up withdrawing the resolution, and because it was obvious, I think that it would have gone forward. So now, and then there's still some concern out there. One of the concerns is that this was established as the Cradle of Country Music Park. The sculpture has nothing obvious to do with country music, and there were some who thought that whatever artwork went in there should have, but that's water under the bridge. That was decided a long time ago, and that they wanted to make sure that it still honors the city's musical heritage. The city does have these plaques with the names of prominent musicians in Knoxville's history that have been in the park before. They're going to be going back into the park now, but it's not really. People haven't seen what the final plans are going to look like. So a lot of people don't believe it till they see it. Well, it's they haven't seen the plan, but the proposal is to go ahead and put those back into the park. So it all should come together, and sometime before the end of the year, they should have that sculpture in place.
Mm-hmm. All right, and I think that and in your coverage of it, you talked a little bit about this is not the first time we've had a big downtown development project kind of hung up over concerns about trees. In the renovation, redevelopment of Market Square 20 years ago, the original design for that was going to take out all of those, I think they're sawtooth oaks that they have down at the south end of the square. And there was quite a fight then, too, as I recall. And in fact,
there was.
they ended up saving those trees as well.
Yeah. In those days, I think, if I recall correctly, without going back and trying to find all those documents, is that they were going to take those trees out and replace them with new trees, but they were young trees, and that was all of the trees in Market Square. That one thing that they took great pains this time to talk about was, they would be the original plan was to take out 5 trees from Cradle of Country Music Park, but they're going to be expanding Cradle of Country Music Park. They're going to be planting more trees, and there would be a net gain of I believe it was 9 trees that they were going to have, and that's still, of course, these are young trees, not mature trees, and so it didn't really,
That didn't satisfy people.
Didn't satisfy the Sierra Club, and but I think now they're going to be able to live with saving 80% of the trees that were originally slated for removal.
Well, and I think it's just an indicator that if you're a local government looking to do any project on public land somewhere that is going to require removing trees, don't assume that there won't be pushback, because people like trees.
People do like trees. I like trees.
I like trees too.
But yeah, there was there was also opposition recently about the plans for Lakeshore Park, where they're going in and putting in some ball fields, and they removed moving a bunch of trees there, and there was some pushback there.
Yeah, in that case, the trees did come down.
The trees did come down, but again, this is one thing, and this is one thing that the city has as a policy. When they remove a tree, they plant multiple trees in its place, not right where necessarily where it was, but they plant multiple trees so that eventually there's a net gain in the tree canopy in the city. So.
All right. Well, also, City Council talked about and did vote on another resolution, which was a largely symbolic one, but having to do with abortion, right? Yeah,
and these were back to back on the agenda, and a lot of the same people stayed. It was a big crowd for a City Council meeting. What this was a resolution that. Basically, as its basis is, that abortion is part of OBGYN care, and that for health reasons, the legislature should go back and basically restore abortion as part of women's health care, and especially put back in. Exemptions to any statutes about the health of the mother and rape and incest, but basically also said, well, basically restore it.
The resolution called for abortion to be
legalized again, and so that is and 7 council members of the 9 council members signed on as sponsors. There was never any question that this was going to pass. But there was a large crowd there. They had 8 speakers there. Every single one of them spoke in favor of doing this and making city council's opinions on this known to the state legislature, because that was the big thing. Is we want the legislature to know. We want things to go back the way they were, and no one spoke in opposition at all, which is you'd think is kind of unusual a little bit, but
well, it may be that anti-abortion groups kind of at this point figure they've won. They've won,
so they didn't.
Essentially, and the city council is not going to.
And as you said, this is a symbolic thing. Now, one thing that was kind of interesting. It was almost all, as I said, there were 7 sponsors, and almost all council members, were enthusiastic supporters. But there were a couple that were kind of interesting. 3 of the council members, Lynn Fugit and Tommy Smith and Janet Testerman, all expressed reservations about this, primarily because they don't like to tell the legislature what to do. They say, well, we need to play in our sandbox, and they play in their sandbox. This is a state matter, and that they're very reluctant to do that. However, both Smith and Fugit said, we're reluctant to do this, but we're going to support this because of the importance of the issue. Fugit, I think one was, she's basically a Republican, but she was talking again. They couched this in terms of health care, in general, and she pointed out that she had a risky pregnancy when she became a mother, and that it was just it gave her chills to think that her doctor wouldn't be able to give her candid medical advice, when she was pregnant. Obviously she did. She carried her baby to term, and has a son now, lives in Italy, and I believe it's Italy, maybe Germany now. She said that was important to her. Mm-hmm. To know that she could trust that whatever advice her doctor gave her was truly the best medical advice she could get. There were 8 council members who voted for this. Janet Testerman did not vote for it. She abstained. Testerman is also a Republican. She ran for the state house and lost in the primary this year. She is essentially anti-abortion. Mm-hmm.
Which I believe she said when she was running for the legislature.
But she also is. She also is in favor of more exemptions that are actually aren't real exemptions in the law. And she brought to the point she's a cancer survivor. She talked about that she knew cancer women who were diagnosed with cancer after they would become pregnant, and the drugs that they have to take could harm the fetus. There are all kinds of complications involved, right. And she said that's something that nobody ever talks about. So I mean, she was saying that. I mean, I think is a way of explaining, I'm against abortion, but I understand this, and back and forth. And she said, that abortion is not a black and white issue. There are a lot of gray areas and a lot of different aspects. And so she couldn't vote for it. And
I think politically it's worth noting that Testerman and Fugit both will be up for re-election next year if they choose to run.
Right.
And running within the city, I think being in favor of abortion rights is almost certainly going to be the more politically, leaving aside people's personal feelings about it, it's also the better political side to be on if you're running within city limits. I don't think a candidate running citywide espousing a strong anti-abortion message is going to get a lot of traction with the Knoxville voting base as we know it.
Yeah, and also you don't know how much how much that will actually play in the city election, because as the others who talked about playing in their own sandbox, noted, abortion is ultimately a state issue right now. So, there's nothing that city council will be able to do, about it one way or the other. So, it may not be a big deal. Probably won't be a big deal. Although, if a progressive candidate runs against Janet Testerman, they might bring it up.
Sure.
And and the same, if there's a conservative challenger to Lynn Fugit or any of the others, they would, they might bring it up too. So it's one of those things where it might be one of these things that we end up talking about next year during the election, because they bring it up, but it's really meaningless in the scheme of what they actually do.
Right. But their powers.
But politically, it's a big deal.
Yep. So. Well, and we will actually have some more coverage of the impacts of this state abortion ban coming next week, talking a little bit more about these issues of the decisions that have been not entirely taken out of doctors' hands, but greatly complicated for doctors facing all sorts of, doctors and patients, pregnant patients facing all sorts of situations. Yeah. So we will have more coverage of that. All right, one other thing I think to mention from this past week, I had a story on Friday about a new charter school that is getting ready to open here in Knoxville, which we had written about before. This has been talked about for some months now, that there's going to be a school called the Knoxville Preparatory School planning to open in the fall of 2024. The reason that we wrote about it this week is just this past Saturday, there was a scheduled open house for parents who might be interested in sending their kids, their sons, because it's going to be an all-boys school, to this new school when it opens in 2 years. So they had an open house for basically current fourth graders and their parents, because initially they're looking to open with just 100 sixth grade students in 2024, and then they would add one grade level a year until they get a complete 6 through 12 grade school. Interesting for a couple of reasons. The first is that we only have one charter school in Knoxville, in Knox County, Emerald Academy, which is affiliated with the Emerald Youth Foundation. And that makes us unusual. Tennessee has 118 current charter schools. 75 of them are in Memphis. 36 of them, I think, are in Nashville, Davidson County, and then 6 of them are in Hamilton County, Chattanooga. So of the big 4 school districts, we have by far the fewest charter schools. I think charter students now make up close to 20% of the students in Memphis, for example, Shelby County schools. But this new school, so Emerald Academy is a K through 8 school. This new school is looking to be 6 through 12. So at least right now, I don't know if Emerald Academy has, I'm planning to do some follow-up with Emerald Academy on their plans in the future. I don't know if they have any plans about extending into higher grades. But right now, those 2 schools would kind of overlap in the middle school years. So they would be in somewhat competition, but also be somewhat complementary. The Knoxville Preparatory School is basically a project, not a franchise exactly, but of an existing school in Chattanooga called the Chattanooga Preparatory School, Chattanooga Prep, which is also an all-boys school that was created in 2018. As kind of a complement, they also have an all-girls school in Chattanooga, the Chattanooga Girls Leadership Academy, and we do not currently have an all-girls school in Knox County. Nobody's planning one that I know of. Maybe that's, if this school gets going, maybe somebody will decide we want to do a girls' school too. But it was interesting to me, the Chattanooga school was founded by Ted and Kelly Alling, who are, Ted Alling is a very successful investor who basically, he and his wife returned back to Chattanooga with all of his wealth in hand, and got involved in local philanthropy and decided to help start this boys' school. And they got a charter. And of course, so charter schools do receive public funding. They receive the same per pupil local and state allocation that any of the schools in the local district do. But they also typically have outside funding sources as well. So in this case, it's the Allings and kind of a board that they've set up for the Chattanooga school to help support it. They're looking to set up something similar in Knoxville and Knox County, so I'm sure that they'll be looking for local philanthropy money to help with the physical plant, because the state funding goes to basically support instruction. Governor Bill Lee, who's a big fan of charter schools, has actually added some state funding in for charter school facilities money as well. But still, charter schools, typically, a lot of their facility expenses, infrastructure expenses are covered by outside dollars that they raise themselves. And so you end up with often higher per pupil expenditures total in those schools because you have both the public dollars going in and the private dollars. They haven't selected a site yet in Knoxville, but they said they're looking at Western Heights, which is in the midst of a redevelopment of the largest public housing development in the city.
Right.
Is being redeveloped there. And I think these charter schools, it's interesting, tend to focus very much on lower income students, often racial minorities. Again, like I said, Memphis, Shelby County Schools, which has by far the largest minority student population in the state, also has the largest number of charter schools. And they say this school will be open to any student, any male student in Knox County at these grade levels will be able to apply to it. But they're focusing their marketing and outreach efforts very much on kind of lower income urban areas. That's where they expect most of their students to come from. So, it'll be interesting to watch that develop. They had this public information session. They're going to have more of those coming up. They will be applying for an actual charter from the Knox County School Board next spring, which they very much anticipate will be granted because it'll basically be a replica of the one they already have in Chattanooga. And, there are people who have a lot of concerns about charter schools. They see them as taking away funding and resources from existing public schools. But it does seem like especially with the push that Governor Bill Lee is making, assuming he gets reelected, we're probably going to see more of these here in Knoxville.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how the all boys model goes, and kind of how what the response is from the families that might want to send their children there. And then again, as you mentioned, there's not a companion all girls school. I would not be surprised if something like that does come along, whether it's from this group or someone else. Just because I think that that somebody's going to look at that and say, hey, why not have an all-girls school? And that way they don't have to worry about those stinky boys.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that is the argument for the single-gender schools is that, I mean, the folks at Chattanooga Prep were talking about that having an all-boys school allows them to focus specifically on sort of the social and emotional development of boys. And, of course, we have a lot of talk these days about gender and what gender means and what gender roles are and everything. But, there are certainly certain kinds of behavioral and emotional issues that any teacher can tell you. You see certain kinds of things more often from boys than girls. You can argue about the reasons for that, but anyway, it's something that I think teachers see in their classrooms all the time. And so that and also for girls to have the all girls setting, it allows them to kind of focus on themselves and maybe not be disrupted as often by, for example, some of the boys in the class and so forth. So yeah, it'll just be interesting to see what appeal that has. I mean, these schools only operate if students sign up for them. They can't force anybody. They're entirely elective. They can't force anybody to go to them. So it'll be interesting to see both what kinds of response they get and then also what kinds of programming responses we might see from the public schools if they start to see more and more charter schools coming in offering different kinds of programming that are appealing to people. There's no reason that they couldn't do some of those things in regular public schools as well. Maybe not the all-boys model, although I don't actually know if state law prevents that or not. If a local school district wants to do it, I would have to look into that. But this feels very much like I think the door to charter schools has been opened much wider at the state level, and we're going to see more of them here. And there's a lot of debate about whether they're good, bad, or indifferent in terms of long-term academic performance and so forth. So I guess all we can do is kind of watch that.
Yep.
All right. Well, let's see. I think we've talked through the last couple of weeks. We are to the point where we look ahead to this coming week. Not a tremendous amount on the calendar. The school board, Knox County School Board, will meet for its monthly work session on Monday, followed by its voting meeting on Wednesday. Not a super exciting agenda, but they will be having their own reorganization meeting where they will be electing a chair and vice chair for the coming year, and they will be welcoming 3 new school board members who were all just elected. And so I don't anticipate any big surprises there like we saw at County Commission, but I didn't anticipate any surprises at County Commission, so
I was going to say,
who knows? Maybe they'll name the student representative the chair of the board. Anything can happen.
Oh boy, that would be something.
Yeah, put the kids in charge.
Yeah.
Anything else coming up next week?
We don't have anything kind of, as you said, on the calendars. No formal things coming up, but I think we've got a couple of good enterprise reports coming up that will be well worth people checking out. So,
all right. Well, and you can find those, as always, at CompassKnox.com, where you can join our growing legions of happy subscribers. 4 years. 4 years in.
And a lot of them have been with us for the entire 4 years.
We have a very high subscriber retention rate, and we thank our subscribers for that, whether they joined us in 2018, 19, 20, 21, or this year.
I'm going to interrupt as one of those 2020 subscribers to say thank you for what you guys do, because when I started my podcast, I was trying to get into a better understanding of what's going on. I tell the story all the time. I'm in District 18. It was the Gina Oster-Manis race. I was trying to figure out who these people are, who I get to vote for, what that kind of stuff is. And the big local news sources had literally a paragraph and a half on that race of explaining who I'm voting for. Manis, with his city run, had a little bit more background to him, but I didn't know who Gina Oster was. And that's how I found you guys in the first place. And I went from that guy that knows next to nothing about who's running where to digging into Compass to get real understanding. And for my end and my Dork podcast side of it, I appreciate what you guys do and congratulate your 4th year.
Well, thank you so much, Seth. We
Seth.
appreciate that, and that is exactly what we're here for, to make people feel like they just understand a little bit more about what is going on around them. Our producer is Lord Seth Barber here at Barbarian Studios. Our theme music is by Will Wright, and we will be back next week feeling even better, right, Scott?
Absolutely. A little less fatigued every day.
Less fatigued and less phlegmy. Have a good one, everybody.
Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And many thanks to William Wright for composing our theme song. Compass Points is a partnership of Barking Shark Media and Barbarian Productions, and recorded by Lord Seth A. Barber at Barbarian Studios, Knoxville, Tennessee.